There is a haunting, unwritten rule above 26,000 feet in that desolate, beautiful place we call the death zone. The rule is simple, yet brutal. The mountain does not bargain, and the summit is only the halfway point. For many, the true battle doesn't begin until they turn their backs on the sky to head home. It was May 15, 2025. The season had been chaotic, a mix of triumph and terror as climbers from around the world jockeyed for position on the narrow ridges of the Himalayas. Among them was Subrata Ghosh, a 45-year-old climber from India. He wasn't just a name on a permit list. He was a man with a lifetime of dreams packed into his rucksack, climbing with the Snowy Horizon Treks expedition. He was strong, he was determined, and he had done everything right. But on Everest, doing everything right isn't always enough. Subrata found himself at one of the most notorious bottlenecks in the world, the Hillary Step. Once a formidable rock face, now a snow slope, it remains a place where time seems to stop and where time is the one luxury you cannot afford. He was descending. He had touched the roof of the world, but as he navigated that jagged spine of rock and ice, his body began a silent, internal war against the thinning air. It wasn't a fall that threatened him, but the invisible, creeping hand of acute altitude sickness. This isn't just a story about a climb, it's a story about the fragility of life at 29,000 feet, and the heartbreaking reality of a man who died while looking toward safety. Welcome back to Ben's Stories. We are dedicated to uncovering the human truths behind the world's most mysterious and tragic events. If you appreciate the research we put into preserving these memories and telling these stories with the respect they deserve, please take a brief moment to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us continue to honor those who dared to dream. Now, let's ascend to the fateful spring of 2025. To understand the tragedy of May 15th, we first have to understand the man inside the suit. At 45 years old, Subrata Ghosh was in the prime of his climbing life. For our viewers here in the States, think about where you were at 45. It's often a turning point of time when we look at our lives and ask, what have I built? What mountains have I yet to climb? Quite literally, in Subrata's case, he wasn't a reckless thrill-seeker chasing an adrenaline high. He was a methodical, determined individual from West Bengal, India. He carried the hopes of his community and the quiet, heavy burden of personal ambition. Everest isn't cheap, and it isn't easy. It requires years of savings, months of grueling physical training, and a mental fortitude that most of us will never have to summon. Subrata had signed up with Snowy Horizon Treks, a well-known operator in the region. When you sign that waiver and hand over your life savings, you are placing your trust in the logistics, the oxygen bottles, the tents, the food, and most importantly, the Sherpa guides who pave the way. By the spring of 2025, the commercialization of Everest had reached a fever pitch. But the mountain, in its cold indifference, hadn't changed a bit since Hillary and Norgay first stood there in 1953. The expedition began like so many others. Subrata navigated the Khumbu icefall, that terrifying river of ice that shifts and groans underfoot without incident. He pushed through the western Khum, often called the Valley of Silence, where the sun reflects off the snow with such intensity that climbers can suffer from heat stroke while standing on ice. He made his way up the Lot's face, a sheer wall of blue ice that demands every ounce of calf strength you possess. By the second week of May, the chatter on the radios at base camp was tense. The weather window, that brief period when the jet stream lifts off the summit, allowing humans to survive up there, was predicted to be narrow. In 2025, the crowds were heavy. When the window is tight, everyone moves at once. It creates a traffic jam in the sky, a conga line of desperate souls breathing bottled air. Subrata arrived at Camp 4, the South Col, on May 14th. This is the desolate, wind-swept plateau at 26,000 feet. It is the waiting room for the summit, but it is also the beginning of the end for the human body. Up here, you are not recovering, you are dying. Every hour spent at Camp 4 is borrowed time. Your digestive system shuts down. Your blood thickens to sludge to conserve heat. Your brain struggles to process simple thoughts. The plan was standard but brutal. They would leave the safety of the tents late at night on May 14th to reach the summit by the morning of May 15th. This allows climbers to descend before the afternoon weather turns deadly. Subrata zipped up his down suit, checked his oxygen regulator, and stepped out into the pitch-black freezing void. For those of you who have never experienced high altitude, it's hard to describe the sensation. Imagine breathing through a narrow straw while walking on a treadmill set to the highest incline, wearing a heavy winter coat, all while feeling like you have the worst flu of your life. That was Subrata's reality as he placed one crampon in front of the other. As the line of climbers snaked its way up the triangular face toward the balcony, Subrata was moving. He was doing it. The adrenaline of the summit push can mask a lot of symptoms. It's a deceptive drug. It hides the fatigue. It hides the creeping edema. You look up and see the stars so close you feel you could pluck them from the sky. You look down and see the string of headlamps below you, a fragile chain of humanity clinging to the crust of the earth. He reached the balcony, a small platform at 27,600 feet where climbers often change oxygen bottles. He continued to the south summit. The weather was holding. The wind was fierce, biting through the layers, but the sky was clear. Then came the moment every climber dreams of, the true summit. On the morning of May 15, 2025, Subrata Ghosh stood on top of the world. He had done it. The tricolor flag of India was likely unfurled. The horizon curved away in every direction. For a few glorious minutes, he was the highest human being on the planet. But as any veteran mountaineer will tell you, the summit is a trap. It seduces you into thinking you've conquered the mountain, but the mountain is merely waiting. The statistics are grim. The majority of accidents on Everest happen on the descent. You are exhausted, your oxygen is running low, and the adrenaline that pushed you up begins to fade, leaving only the cold, hard reality of your physical limits. Subrata turned around to begin his journey back to Camp 4. He had achieved his lifelong dream. He didn't know it yet, but the clock had already started ticking down on his final hours. He was tired. We are all tired after a long day's work, but this was a different kind of exhaustion. This was a cellular exhaustion, and somewhere deep inside his physiology, the lack of oxygen was beginning to trigger a cascade of failures that no amount of willpower could stop. There is a saying among high-altitude mountaineers, the summit is optional, but getting down is mandatory. It's a cliché, sure, but on May 15, 2025, for Subrata Ghosh, it became a terrifying prophecy. As Subrata left the summit, the initial euphoria, that massive dopamine hit that screams, "I did it," began to evaporate. In its place came the crushing reality of physics and biology. When you ascend, you are fighting gravity, yes, but you are driven by a singular goal. When you descend, gravity pulls at you. Your muscles are screaming from the eccentric loading of stepping down, and your mental drive vanishes. You have accomplished the goal. Now, you just want to be warm. You just want to sleep, and that desire to sleep is the siren song of the death zone. Subrata was moving toward the Hillary Step. For those of you watching who remember the famous accounts of the 1996 disaster, the Hillary Step was once a nearly vertical 40-foot rock face. It was the last great physical obstacle, but the earthquake in 2015 altered the topography, and heavy snow years have changed it further. By 2025, it wasn't so much a climb as it was a steep, snowy ramp flanked by loose rock. But make no mistake, it remains the most dangerous bottleneck on the mountain. As Subrata navigated the ridge, something catastrophic was happening inside him. At 29,000 feet, the atmospheric pressure is about one-third of what it is at sea level. Even with supplemental oxygen, your body is starving. This starvation triggers a survival mechanism that can inadvertently kill you. It likely started subtly. A headache that no amount of water could fix. A slight loss of coordinations, tumbling on a crampon placement that he would have nailed an hour ago. We call it acute mountain sickness, or AMS, but that term sounds too clinical, too mild. It sounds like a bad hangover. What Subrata was likely facing was the rapid onset of HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema, or HAPE, high-altitude pulmonary edema. Imagine your brain swelling inside your skull because the blood vessels are leaking fluid in a desperate attempt to get more oxygen. There is nowhere for the brain to expand. It crushes against the bone. The result is confusion, lethargy, and ataxia, the loss of control over your body movements. You become like a drunk driver behind the wheel of your own body, navigating a ledge the width of a dining room table with a 2-mile drop on either side. Subrata reached the Hillary Step. It was here, in this chaotic funnel of climbers going up and climbers coming down, that the engine simply quit. Reports suggest he didn't fall, he didn't slip. He simply stopped. This is the nightmare scenario for any guide. The snowy horizon Trek's Sherpas, the unsung heroes who carry the weight of these expeditions, would have noticed the change immediately. A climber who stops moving at that altitude is a climber in immediate, mortal danger. You can't just take a break at the Hillary Step. If you stop, you freeze. If you stop, you die. The guides would have checked his oxygen regulator. Is the tank empty? No. The flow was likely fine. Is the mask frozen? They would have cleared the ice. But the problem wasn't the equipment. The problem was that Subrata's body had declared bankruptcy. Witnesses on the mountain that day, other climbers pushing past, fighting their own exhaustion, would have seen a heartbreaking sight. A man, fully geared up, strong enough to summit moments ago, now slumped against the snow. His guides likely shouting, pleading, "Subrata, stand up. You have to move. Down. Go down." But when the brain swells from edema, reality fractures. He might not have known where he was. He might have thought he was back home in India, warm and safe. He might have felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of peace, a desire to just close his eyes for a second. Now, consider the environment. The Hillary Step is a choke point. In 2025, despite new regulations to limit numbers, the traffic was still there. When a climber collapses here, it creates a crisis for everyone. The safety rope, the single lifeline tethering everyone to the mountain, is blocked. Other climbers, people like you and me who had spent $50,000 in 2 months of their lives for this moment, had to make a horrific choice. To get past Subrata, they had to unclip from the safety line, step around a dying man on a precarious ledge, and clip back in. It is a moral injury that haunts Everest veterans forever. You look into the eyes of a fellow human being who is fading away, and you have to keep walking. Not because you are cruel, but because if you try to carry him, you will both die. Rescue at 28,700 feet is physically impossible for 1 or 2 people. A deadweight human body is incredibly heavy. In the death zone, a Sherpa who can normally carry 100 pounds can barely lift his own arm. To carry a man like Subrata down the jagged rocks of the Hillary Steppe would require a team of 6 to 8 fresh, strong climbers on a stretcher. There were no stretchers. There were no fresh teams. There was only the howling wind, the ticking clock, and the desperate, failing struggle of a man trying to command his legs to move. The Snowy Horizon guides did what they could. They likely cranked his oxygen flow to the maximum, sacrificing their own reserves. They would have administered dexamethasone, a powerful steroid carried for exactly this situation, hoping to reduce the swelling in his brain enough to get him walking again. It's a Lazarus drug. Sometimes it wakes the dead just enough to get them down to Camp 4. But on May 15th, the drug didn't work fast enough. Or perhaps the damage was already too profound. Subrata Ghosh was trapped in the space between the earth and the sky, his body shutting down system by system, right there on the most famous landmark of the world's highest peak. He wasn't alone, yet he was completely isolated, surrounded by people in down suits, hidden behind reflective goggles and oxygen masks. He was drifting into the long, cold sleep. The tragedy wasn't a dramatic fall. It was a slow, quiet extinguishing of a light. And as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen over the Himalayas, the realization settled in for his guides. They weren't going to get him down. Time is a thief. We say this often in life, usually referring to missed birthdays or children growing up too fast. But at 28,750 feet, time is not just a thief, it is an executioner. As the afternoon of May 15th wore on, the situation at the Hillary Steppe shifted from a rescue operation to a vigil. Subrata Ghosh was slipping away. The physiology of altitude sickness at this stage is terrifyingly peaceful for the victim, but horrific for the observer. As the brain swells, the respiratory drive is depressed, the gasping stops, the panic fades. The cold, which was once a biting enemy, begins to feel like a warm blanket. Hypothermia often partners with cerebral edema in these final moments. It's called paradoxical undressing, though Subrata was likely too incapacitated to move. The sensation is one of burning heat. He may have felt he was lying on a sun-drenched beach in West Bengal, not freezing to death on a ridge of ice in the stratosphere. For the Sherpas of Snowy Horizon treks, this was the moment of the impossible choice. I want you to put yourself in their boots for a moment. These men are physically superior to us at altitude, but they are not immortal. They had been pushing their bodies to the limit for 12, maybe 14 hours. Their own oxygen was running low. Every minute they stayed stationary beside Subrata, their own core temperatures dropped. Their own blood thickened. There is a grim calculus on Everest. 1 death is a tragedy. 2 deaths are a statistic. If they tried to stay indefinitely, holding on to a man who could no longer hold on to himself, they would not save him. They would simply die beside him. The mountain would claim 3 lives instead of 1. It is the hardest decision a human being can make, to look at a person you have eaten with, laughed with, and suffered with for weeks, and realize that you must detach yourself to survive. The call to base camp likely happened late that afternoon. Communication from the death zone is often fragmented. The wind tears the words away, but the message would have been unmistakable. He is not moving. We have tried everything. Oxygen finished. We must descend. At base camp, where the air is thick and life is relatively safe, the expedition manager would have looked at the map, looked at the clock, and given the order that no one ever wants to give: save yourselves. It marks the transition of Subrata Ghosh from a climber to a part of the mountain. Subrata died descending. He died having achieved the thing he set out to do. But his death brings us to a harsh reality of Everest that many people in the comfort of their living rooms struggle to comprehend: the disposal of the dead. There are no helicopters that can land at the Hillary Steppe. The air is too thin for the rotors to bite. There are no recovery teams waiting in the wings. When a climber dies at the bottleneck, they cannot be left directly on the path. The route is too narrow. If his body remained on the safety line, every subsequent climber would have to unclimb and step over him, clipping and unclipping their safety tethers around his corpse. It creates a psychological horror and a physical hazard that endangers hundreds of others. So, the final act of respect the guides could offer Subrata was to move him. It takes the last reserves of strength to move a dead weight at that altitude. They would have unclipped him from the main line. They would have secured him to a separate anchor, likely a rock piton or an ice screw, off to the side just a few feet away from the path, but enough to clear the way for the living. He joined the open graveyard. He joined Green Boots, the Sleeping Beauty, and the hundreds of others who remain frozen in time. In the death zone, decay does not happen as it does down here. The cold preserves. Subrata would remain exactly as he was. In those final moments, his down suit bright against the white, his face turned away from the wind. For the climbers coming down behind him on May 15th, and for those pushing up in the days that followed, Subrata became a waypoint. Imagine the psychological toll. You are fighting for your own breath, terrified of your own death, and you must walk past a man who was alive just hours ago. You see his boots. You see the brand of his suit. you see a mirror of your own mortality. The night of May 15, 2025, fell over the Himalayas. The wind picked up, scrubbing the ridge with spin drifts. Subrata Ghosh remained at the Hillary Step, 28,750 feet in the sky. Back home in India, the news hadn't broken yet. His family was likely still waiting for the confirmation of his summit. They were probably looking at the clock, calculating the time difference, thinking, he should be down at Camp 4 by now. He should be drinking tea, he should be safe. They didn't know that their husband, their father, their friend, was already gone. They didn't know that he was now keeping an eternal watch over the roof of the world. The disconnect between the violence of the mountain and the quiet waiting of the family back home is the true tragedy of these expeditions. We focus on the climb, on the physical feat, but the ripples of this event were just beginning to spread outward, moving faster than the storm clouds gathering over the lot's face. As the surviving members of the team stumbled into camp for that night, collapsing into their tents, weeping from exhaustion and trauma, the radio operator at base camp had to pick up the satellite phone. He had to make the call to Kathmandu, who would then make the call to New Delhi. The climbing was over. The morning was about to begin. But before we descend to the sorrow of the aftermath, we have to look at why. Why? In 2025, with all our technology, our weather forecasting, and our experience, does a fit, 45-year-old man simply shut down and die on a guided expedition? Was it preventable? Or is this simply the tax the mountain collects? When we hear about a tragedy like this, our minds naturally look for a villain. Was it the weather? Was it a faulty oxygen tank? Was it a reckless guide? But in the case of Subrata Ghosh, the villain was likely something far more insidious and impossible to prosecute: human biology. We need to really break down what acute mountain sickness means in this context. It sounds manageable, doesn't it? Like seasickness or air sickness, but at 28,000 feet, specifically at the Hillary Step, the margin for error is zero. The medical reports state he died of altitude sickness, but let's look at what that actually looks like in those final hours. By the time Subrata reached the summit, his body had been cannibalizing itself for weeks. In the death zone, you are not just burning calories, you are burning muscle tissue. Your body is prioritizing the heart and the brain, shutting down blood flow to the digestive system and the extremities. But the most dangerous reaction is the delay. This is the cruelty of high-altitude cerebral edema. There is often a silent gap between the onset of the swelling and the collapse. Subrata likely felt strong on the summit. He probably took photos. He probably smiled. The adrenaline masked the symptoms. But the moment he turned around, the moment the goal was achieved, the adrenaline crashed. And when the adrenaline crashes, the symptoms flood in like a dam breaking. The coordination goes first, then the logic, then the will to live. It is a rapid, terrifying descent into unconsciousness, and it happened at the worst possible place on the planet. We also have to talk about the context of 2025. This season was marked by a high number of permits. The Indian market for Everest has exploded in the last decade. Climbing the 7 summits has become a massive status symbol in India, driving hundreds of aspiring mountaineers to the Himalayas every spring. Subrata was climbing with Snowy Horizon Treks. This is a reputable local operator, but it highlights a shift in the industry. We don't know the exact specifics of Subrata's support team numbers that day, but we do know this. On the Hillary Step, on May 15th, when the sickness took hold, no amount of money could buy a helicopter. The only currency that matters up there is physical strength and oxygen, and both were in short supply. And what about the family? This is the part of the story that the adventure magazines rarely cover. Subrata was 45. He wasn't a young bachelor with nothing to lose. He had a life. He had people who relied on him. The decision to climb Everest is inherently selfish. I don't mean that as an insult. It requires a singular tunnel vision focus that excludes everything else. But the price is often paid by those who stay behind. Imagine the timeline for his family in India. May 14th, hope he's going for the summit tonight. May 15th morning, anxiety. Has he made it? Why haven't we heard? May 15th afternoon, confusion. Reports of a successful summit, followed by radio silence. May 16th, the call. That phone call destroys a universe. The notification that Subrata is resting on the mountain is a polite euphemism for a body that will never return home. In Hindu tradition, the body is crucial for the last rites, for the cremation that releases the soul. To leave a body in the ice, frozen forever, in the death zone, is a spiritual heavy blow for the family, adding a layer of cultural trauma to the personal grief. There is also the financial devastation. Many climbers from the middle class mortgage their homes, sell assets, or take massive loans to fund this $40,000 to $50,000 gamble. When the climber returns, they can recoup that through sponsorships, motivational speaking, and career boosts. When the climber dies, the family is left not only with the grief of the loss, but often with a crippling financial crater. They paid a fortune for a coffin of ice. Subrata's death forces us to ask the hard question: is it worth it? We look at the photos of the summit, the curvature of the earth, the majestic beauty, and we say yes. But look at the Hillary step. Look at the frozen boots of a father who just wanted to come home. The 2025 season will be remembered for its chaotic weather and the sheer volume of climbers. But for one family in West Bengal, it will simply be the year the clock stopped. Subrata didn't die because he made a mistake. He didn't die because he was inexperienced. He died because he entered a zone where human life is not meant to exist, and he stayed there 1 hour too long. He was a victim of his own success. If he had turned around at the south summit, if he had given up 100 meters from the top, he might be alive today. He would be the man who almost climbed Everest. Instead, he is the man who conquered Everest and died. It is a cruel irony that in mountaineering, the only difference between a triumph and a tragedy is often the return trip. The summit doesn't care if you've been there. The mountain only demands that you survive the descent. Subrata Ghosh paid the ultimate price for that view. But his story didn't end on the ridge. In the days that followed, as the news spread across the climbing community and the Indian media, Subrata became a symbol, not of failure, but of the terrifyingly thin line between glory and death. His name was added to the list of the fallen, a list that grows longer every year, etched not into stone, but into the ice itself. Subrata Ghosh remains on the mountain. He rests near the Hillary step, forever frozen at the moment of his greatest triumph and his final defeat. He is no longer just a climber. He has become part of the lore of the Himalayas, a silent sentinel watching over the path that so many covet, but so few truly understand. Every climber who passed him in the days following May 15, 2025, had to confront the reality of their own ambition. Subrata serves as a somber reminder that the line between a triumphant return and a tragic end is not measured in miles, but in breaths. He reminds us that nature is not something we conquer. It is something that tolerates us briefly, until it doesn't. We often glorify the summit. We put pictures of the peak on our office walls and use climbing the mountain as a metaphor for every obstacle in life. But stories like Subrata's teach us the harder lesson. The summit is just a point in the sky. The true achievement is the return. The true victory is dinner with your family, the warmth of a bed, the simple, rhythmic beating of a heart at sea level. Subrata Ghosh, age 45, touched the sky. He lived his dream, and for that, we respect him. But he also paid the tariff that the death zone demands. May his soul find the peace that the winds of the southeast ridge could never offer. This brings us to the end of Subrata's journey, but it opens a question I want to ask you. We live in a world that constantly tells us to push harder, to go higher, to never give up. But looking at the tragedy of the Hillary step, I want to know, at what point does the cost of a dream become too high? Would you risk it all for 5 minutes on top of the world, knowing you might never come down? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your perspective on this. Please, go down to the comment section right now and tell me, was it worth it? If you believe that these stories, the stories of real people, real tragedies, and the mysteries of the human spirit deserve to be told with respect and depth, then I need you to join our community. Please, click that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell. It's a small click for you, but it allows us to continue the research, the writing, and the production of these documentaries. We are building something meaningful here, a library of human stories, and we can't do it without you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for respecting the memory of Subrata Ghosh. And until next time, stay curious and stay safe.